My dad has been betraying me for years, and I believed he was looking out for me all that time, that I thought he was the one. Dads are meant to be just like that. A protector, a mentor. A person who cherishes you unconditionally, and without demands. At least that's what I convinced myself of each time I gazed at him, nonetheless. The reality is that he would consistently stand by my side, shielding me from the harshest challenges life might present. My mother was my foundation. She had a way of entering a room that made it come alive with her energy. Her absence felt like an abyss, consuming all that I believed I understood. The individual I once held in the highest regard transformed into the very person I dreaded facing each new day. The transition unfolded slowly, and a tale of finding my voice amidst all the efforts to silence it. My name is Valerie Warner, and as I grew up, my life seemed like it could belong to anyone. A blend of little pleasures. She had a knack for recalling every tiny detail that brought a smile to your face. She had a remarkable ability to recall every little thing that brought a smile to your face. What made you shed tears? As far back as I can recall, my mother was my refuge, while my father, Jackson, and Abbott exuded a calmness that was comforting rather than cold. As no family is without their quirks, but I always felt a sense of gratitude for our Sunday movie nights. We would gather on the couch, completely immersed in the films, and time would slip away unnoticed. Mum had a knack for making popcorn that was just a touch burnt, yet somehow still delightful, while Dad would settle beside her, his arm comfortably resting over her shoulders. It was the essence of ordinary life, but looking back, I understood its delicate nature. My mom's illness, in contrast to the abrupt ailments frequently depicted on television, was a prolonged, arduous, and merciless journey. Watching her fade away over months felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The world felt colder and emptier. It was like a light had gone out, and I didn't know how to find my way back. Dad changed too. At first, I thought it was grief. And as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice cracks in the father I thought I knew. He wasn't just distant. He stood apart. His gaze lingered too long on his touches, they felt off. Reflecting on the past, I find myself wishing I had. I heard the voice within me whispering that something was amiss, yet at 16, navigating grief in solitude, it felt simpler to mute that voice than to confront the truth it sought to reveal. So I chose silence. I convinced myself it was trivial, that I was merely conjuring up illusions since everything already seemed so incorrect. I longed to believe he was merely trying to shield me, just as I had always thought he would. Kindly take a moment to share, like, and subscribe to this video before we continue. We were sitting in the living room. For additional material that sheds light on challenging. It started on a tranquil evening, with only the two of us, filled with tales and meaningful exchanges. The house weighed down on me, along with the gentle rustle of leaves outside the window. He went on, "You both resemble her so closely." I don't think he was either. It was just background noise, a distraction from the void that lingered overhead. I turned to face him as his voice emerged, suddenly low and almost gentle. Individuals have consistently. I was told that I had my mom's eyes and smile. Yet I found myself perplexed, unsure of how to respond. He leant in and gently tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. It was a straightforward action, One that might have seemed harmless in a different setting, yet it did not. Experience purity. His hand lingered too long, causing my body to tense and a knot to twist in my stomach. I felt an overwhelming urge to rise and speak, yet I found myself frozen, as if my body and mind had become estranged, rendering me utterly still. "You're absolutely stunning," he remarked. Panic enveloped me as his hand descended, grazing my breast, while his words lingered in the atmosphere, suffocating me before I could grasp the reality of the situation. I was suddenly pulled from my daydream when he brushed against my thigh. "Father, what are you up to?" I remarked. My voice quivered as I inquired. The room felt as if it were in a whirl, and my heart pounded so fiercely that I feared it might burst. He remained silent, placing a finger to his lips as if to hush me, and leant in closer. My body fought against the urge to cry out and shove him aside. The next few seconds rushed past in a blur, as if every muscle had stiffened in fear. His mass pinning me down, the sharp pain coursing through me, and the tears streaming down my face. I chose not to engage in conflict. I just lay there. When it was over, he rose and began to walk, their frozen tears saturating the carpet beneath me. The most difficult aspect wasn't the suffering or the treachery, it was the remorse. A small, insidious voice in my mind persistently murmured that I had somehow invited it, despite my certainty that I had not. Understand what? Following that night, I remained confined to my room for an entire week, unable to discern the emotions of the walls surrounding me. I lay there for what felt like hours, too stunned to move, as if the act of hiding was the sole barrier between me and a world that now felt foreign, frightening, and suffocating, listening to his words and sensing his presence in the room. I found myself at a loss for how to respond, so I simply let myself slip into a state of numbness. On the sixth day, Valerie knocked on the door and said, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard, and I felt my chest constrict. I longed to shout at him to leave, yet I stayed silent, hoping he would think I was indifferent. Yet he was not. I see that you're feeling upset, he added. Nonetheless, we need to discuss this matter. It felt like a jolt to hear him say, we're all we have now. I felt my stomach twist, but just as I was about to let my anger take over, and it was genuinely just the two of us, I eventually let him in as he continued to twist the guilt knife deeper and deeper. He sat on the edge of my bed, his expression a mix of emotions I couldn't fully identify, guilt, grief, or perhaps something more elusive. I realized I couldn't evade him indefinitely. A part of me was restless for clarity, yearning for any insight that could unravel this perplexity. Forgive me if I caused you pain, he murmured. I extended my hand and then pulled it back. He wielded her as a shield. It won't occur again. Yet by the time it did, 2 weeks later, he had started to alter the narrative to depict himself as a victim of solitude and sorrow. He ceased his knocking and dinner arrangements and chores, as if to comfort me that we remained a family and that life hadn't been altered. Yet, each time he gazed in my direction, I sensed that anticipation, as though he was hoping I would restore everything to normal once more. The second occasion was diminished, yet still profoundly painful. It was a Saturday. We had just finished our dinner in the evening. As I was washing the dishes, I felt a presence behind me. A hand gently rested on my shoulder, catching me off guard. How about we watch a movie? I found myself unable to resist the urge to follow him into the living room. I reassured myself that it was fine, that he wouldn't make a move, and that I could walk away if I felt uneasy. But then his hand brushed against my leg, and the pattern began anew. His touches were gentler and more deliberate this time, as if he were trying to help me adjust to this new reality. I immersed myself in literature and academic pursuits, seeking to occupy my thoughts, while distancing myself from friends, avoiding conversations with teachers, or even a random passerby, but the anxiety always faded as I approached the moment. What if they didn't believe me? I chose to stay quiet, as the questions piled up and the answers held too much peril. What if I was the one they pointed fingers at? What if it shattered the small family I had remaining? Weeks transformed into months, and the occurrences with my dad diminished. Surprising, yet equally distressing, they occurred from time to time, occasionally weeks apart, as if he were testing the limits of how much I could endure without breaking completely. I began to justify it, convincing myself that maybe this was simply how sorrow had shattered him, and perhaps it wasn't as terrible as it seemed after all. He consistently expressed remorse afterwards, his words laden with guilt and vows to improve, insisting that he loved me, that I was the sole reason for his perseverance. It was convoluted, yet in solitude, I found myself starting to trust him. My urge to scream and flee in order to resist faded and was supplanted through a dull resignation that it was simpler this way, and that resisting would only exacerbate the situation. In the shadows, I experienced an unusual blend of relief and jealousy. Relief because I considered the possibility that this might lead him to redirect his attention towards her, leaving me in solitude. Yet, or was it anger that he could feign normalcy with her, while I was engulfed in the chaos he had orchestrated for months? The nights when he would quietly enter my room ceased. Positioned far too close on the couch, her hand resting on my thigh while my dad looked on. "You're so beautiful," she cooed, her voice dripping with sweetness. A wave of nausea washed over me. My dad did nothing to intervene. In fact, he seemed to foster the moment. That night, the boundaries I believed had been firmly re-established crumbled, as LLA joined him in that oppressive atmosphere, rendering the situation even more surreal. She smiled and whispered reassurances that I didn't want to hear. Her touch felt just as unwelcome as his. It was as if I was drowning all over again. The betrayal struck deeper this time, as it was her, not just him. Moreover, it was even more troubling that he perceived no fault in the situation. My voice quaking with a mix of fury and desperation. "I don't want to do this," I said, brushing away a tear from my cheek. He seemed taken aback for a moment as I rushed to express my feelings before I could lose my composure. "I don't want her here. She's making things worse." "You're just jealous," he replied, my voice shaking. "I just wanted to stop." He told me in a soft, almost proud tone that I couldn't bear the idea of making you unhappy. His words were a perverted form of confirmation that despite everything else seeming to be falling apart, I still had some control over my life. However, the relief didn't last long because his touches became more frequent and his explanations more complex. He said one night, his hand brushed against my back, "People wouldn't understand. But that's okay, we don't need anyone else." I wanted to yell at him, telling him that what he was doing was wrong and that I wasn't a substitute for my mother. But the words remained stuck in my throat, weighed down by guilt and fear, with no door and only walls that grew tighter and tighter around me. The more I tried to make sense of it, I stopped questioning it because doing so would have required me to face the full weight of what was happening, and I wasn't sure I could survive that. University was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to leave behind everything that had happened and find myself again. I had fought hard to stay close to home because my dad insisted on it, but even a short distance felt like freedom. The campus was bustling with energy, filled with new faces, endless possibilities, and the hope of a life that wasn't defined by the walls of my house. I threw myself into my classes, taking advantage of every opportunity. The opportunity to immerse myself in textbooks and lectures offered a distraction from the chaos I had left behind. Yet, terrified that someone might breach my defenses. Trust felt like an alien notion, one I doubted I would ever grasp again. Then I encountered Samra Gillespie. She was the kind of person who She brightened up a room effortlessly, and at first, I kept my distance for safety. She had a talent for drawing people in and making them feel valued. One day, she said we were in the same group after class, and her smile made my heart race. I wanted to grab coffee and brainstorm. But our conversation quickly evolved into hours of discussing the project. She shared stories about her family, her passion for photography, and her dreams of traveling the world. One day, I shared with her the story of my mom and how I cherished reading about the university, which felt like a lifeline. Her narrative was brimming with adventures and grand aspirations, while mine was meticulously refined to omit the unspeakable parts. Over the following weeks, we found ourselves spending more time together, a development I clung to desperately at first. It was unplanned. She had invited me to lunch and later to study sessions that blossomed into late-night conversations. Being around her felt transformative, like stepping into the sunlight after years of dwelling in shadows. For the first time, I felt truly seen, and that realization both exhilarated and terrified me. There was a moment when I thought about revealing everything to her, sharing the parts of my life that I had kept hidden from everyone else. One evening when Sam invited me over, I maintained my defenses, even as I felt them weakening with each of her smiles. We went to watch a movie in her dorm, and I felt tense all over. She obviously noticed, but instead of yanking away, she put her hand over mine and said, "You're safe." Her words had a profound impact on me. I excused myself to the bathroom and stared at my reflection with tears in my eyes. I yearned for normalcy, for the ability to hold her hand without feeling overwhelmed by the weight of the world. The following morning, I decided that I couldn't continue living torn between two worlds, the part of me that still felt tethered to my father's control, and the part of me that craved connection. My hands were shaking, my throat dry, but with great effort, I forced the words out, "Dad, it must stop. I am unable to, we are unable to accomplish that." His voice dropped low, almost pleading, as his face twisted in a blend of astonishment and what seemed like betrayal. "You understand that we are all that we have," he said. My voice rose in intensity as I replied, "I mean it. I can no longer live like this." This isn't normal, and it's not acceptable. For a moment, he looked as if he might disagree, but then he nodded and said quietly, "If that's what you want." That familiar knot twisted in my stomach. And I wanted to believe him. I truly did. Yet, trust felt unattainable, as his promises had been shattered in the past. So, why would this time be any different? In the meantime, Samara remained even on the worst days, she had a way of making me feel like I could breathe again. Spoke in a gentle yet penetrating tone. "Do you ever sense that you're burdened by something too weighty to bear by yourself?" I paused, my fingers clutching the blades of grass beneath me, yearning to express her everything. But every time I tried to speak, fear choked me. What if she had a different opinion of me? But what if she detested me even more? What if my dad got jailed after she reported it? When I eventually answered in my voice, which was no more than a whisper, she didn't press. Instead, she simply nodded and put her palm over mine, silently reminding me that she was always there for me. That night, I remained awake in bed. I couldn't bring myself to say no, no matter what. What he had done lingered in my mind, and I wished for Samara to comprehend it. Yet, how could I articulate something so convoluted? As I stared at the ceiling,